Have you ever wondered what you might do if everything you loved was threatened right before your eyes? The story I'm about to share with you today haunted the plantation corridors of Louisiana for generations, yet remains buried in the shadows of our history books. I discovered this account while researching forgotten resistance stories in the American South, the kind that never make it to mainstream documentaries. What happened on the Magnolia Plantation near Baton Rouge in 1847 wasn't just another act of rebellion. It was a mother's ultimate sacrifice that changed how overseers operated throughout the region. Before we begin this dark journey through one woman's extraordinary courage, take a moment to subscribe to witness more of these hidden historical truths that powerful interests have tried to erase. The testimony you're about to hear contains details so shocking that plantation owners banned its discussion for decades. Are you ready to discover why the name Abigail Moses still echoes in whispers along the Mississippi River? Today, nothing remains of the Magnolia Plantation except crumbling stone foundations half swallowed by the Louisiana swampland. The scent of rotting vegetation hangs heavy in the humid air, masking the brutal history that unfolded here. Birds call across the bayou, their songs interrupting an otherwise eerie silence that blankets these forgotten ruins. In the spring of 1847, these grounds witnessed an act of resistance so profound it sent tremors through the entire plantation system of the American South. When a mother named Abigail Moses took justice into her own hands, she exposed the fundamental contradiction at the heart of the slave economy, that those deemed property could become the architects of their oppressors' downfall. Standing amid these moss-covered stones, one can almost hear the crackling flames that consumed the overseer's quarters that fateful April night. The same flames that had scarred a child's innocent hands just days before. The charred timbers that once stood here tell a story of calculated retribution, of a woman who transformed her kitchen knowledge into a weapon of justice. As darkness falls across these ruins, shadows seem to move with purpose among the trees. What if I told you that the methods Abigail devised spread across plantations throughout Louisiana and Mississippi, creating a network of resistance that owners could neither track nor contain? If you want to accompany more cases like this, that shake entire societies and reveal hidden truths, subscribe to the channel to not miss any investigation. Magnolia Plantation stretched across 2,200 acres of fertile soil along the Mississippi River, just north of Baton Rouge. The main house stood 3 stories tall, its white columns visible for miles across the flat landscape, while 57 slave cabins formed tight rows behind the sugar processing facilities. At its economic peak in the 1840s, over 180 enslaved persons worked its fields and household. Overseer Thomas Wilkes operated with unchallenged authority beneath plantation owner Jeremiah Thornton. The daily hierarchy flowed down through drivers, house slaves, field hands, and children, each level bearing different burdens but united in their subjugation. The plantation bell rang at 4:30 each morning, summoning workers to 16-hour days in sugar fields where temperatures regularly exceeded 100 degrees. Inside the processing house, enormous copper kettles boiled day and night during harvest season. The sickly sweet smell of molasses mixed with sweat permeated every corner of the property. Children as young as 6 carried water to field workers or minded infants while parents labored. The crack of Wilkes' distinctive bullwhip, recognizable by its braided leather handle wrapped in copper wire, served as constant reminder of punishment for any perceived deficiency. The medical ledger from 1846 recorded 47 serious injuries from processing equipment, 23 whipping-related infections, and 14 deaths, including 3 children. Plantation records noted these losses with the same detached accounting reserved for damaged tools or deceased livestock. As twilight descended each evening, workers returned to cabins measuring 12 by 15 feet, where entire families shared single-room dwellings with dirt floors. Through thin wooden walls traveled whispers of resistance, prayers, and warnings. And on certain nights, when Wilkes drank his whiskey on the overseer's porch, his shadow would move toward the cabins, and mothers would silently hide their daughters. The autumn of 1846 brought rumors of a new overseer's technique, spreading from plantations near New Orleans, the deliberate burning of slaves' hands as punishment for perceived theft or slowness, permanently marking them while preserving their ability to work. Abigail Moses, age 32, moved between worlds with rare precision. Purchased by the Thorntons at 16, She had ascended to head kitchen slave through her exceptional culinary abilities. Her cornbread and spiced preserves earned particular praise from visitors, who never suspected the herbs she cultivated served dual purposes. Abigail's knowledge of plants extended beyond cooking. The small garden behind her cabin contained carefully tended medicinal herbs, knowledge passed down from her grandmother in Virginia. Plantation mistress Catherine Thornton regularly requested Abigail's remedies for headaches and female complaints, creating a unique position of trust that allowed her access to the main house medicine cabinet, including laudanum and various tinctures. This trust extended to meal preparation for plantation guests and business associates. Abigail's hands prepared food for governor's representatives, cotton buyers from Europe, and neighboring plantation owners. Her movements throughout the property, from kitchen to garden to main house, rarely drew suspicion. She could be invisible when necessary, present but unseen as whites discussed business, politics, and property acquisitions. Among the enslaved community, Abigail served as unofficial midwife, healer, and keeper of oral histories. Her cabin became a discreet gathering place where information exchanged and community decisions formed. When new slaves arrived, Abigail assessed their skills and temperament, helping integrate them into existing networks of support. What the Thorntons never fully grasped was Abigail's extraordinary memory. She retained every conversation overheard, every letter glimpsed on the master's desk, every whispered confession from the mistress. She knew which overseers on neighboring plantations were cruel and which might show mercy. She recognized which paths through the swamp might offer temporary escape, and she understood precisely which herbs, in which combinations, produced which effects in the human body. Her daughter Sarah, age 8, had inherited her mother's intelligence and quiet observational skills. The child could read, a dangerous forbidden skill Abigail had taught in secret using discarded newspapers and the mistress's abandoned books. Leave in the comments. Never give up on truth if you believe justice should reach all the oppressed. Overseer Thomas Wilkes arrived at Magnolia in January 1847, replacing his predecessor who had died of yellow fever. Within his first week, he established new protocols, decreased food rations, extended work hours, and public punishments designed for maximum humiliation. In February, he ordered elderly Joseph flogged for dropping a crate of glasses, administering 20 lashes despite the man's 70 years. When field hand Marcus collapsed from heat exhaustion, Wilkes forced him to stand barefoot on sun-heated metal for 3 hours. Young mother Rebecca received 10 lashes for allowing her baby to cry during the mistress's afternoon rest. Abigail witnessed these punishments from the kitchen window, her face maintaining its practiced neutrality, while her hands kneaded bread dough with increasing force. She treated the victim's wounds afterward, applying poultices of plantain leaves and whispered comfort. In March, Wilkes introduced his innovation, targeted burning. He heated metal implements in the fireplace, then pressed them against the skin of those accused of infractions. Palms, where calluses offered some protection, became his preferred target, the pain excruciating, but the damage unlikely to permanently limit work capacity. 5 men and 3 women endured this punishment in March alone, their blistered hands making sleep impossible and daily tasks agonizing. Abigail documented each atrocity in her memory. She began collecting rainwater in a special clay pot, adding specific herbs each night under the new moon. She measured the distance from her cabin to the overseer's quarters in careful steps. She noted which nights Wilkes drank himself into stupor and which nights he remained alert. The plantation atmosphere transformed. Eyes lowered further in Wilkes' presence. Conversation ceased entirely when he approached. Children were kept hidden whenever possible. The community tightened, secrets held closer, information shared only with absolute trust. Inside Abigail, something fundamental shifted. The controlled anger she had maintained for years crystallized into cold resolution. She began testing her herbal mixtures on insects, observing their effects with clinical detachment. She studied the construction of the overseer's quarters, noting the dry timber, the single entrance, the small window facing away from the main house. April 12, 1847 began like any ordinary Tuesday. Sarah helped her mother prepare breakfast for the main house, carefully carrying a tray of biscuits from outdoor oven to kitchen. Overseer Wilkes, inspecting the morning work assignments, spotted the child and called her over. "Girl, what's in your pocket?" he demanded, noticing a small bulge in her apron. "Nothing, sir," Sarah replied, her eyes downcast as Abigail had taught her. "Lies from a thieving child," Wilkes declared, grabbing her arm. He reached into the pocket and withdrew a small scrap of paper with practiced letters, Sarah's writing practice from the night before. His face darkened with rage. "Who taught you this devil's work?" he demanded, shaking the child. Sarah remained silent, her eyes seeking her mother's across the yard. Abigail stood frozen, the kitchen knife in her hand suddenly visible to Wilkes. "Put that down and come here," he ordered Abigail. "Your child needs correction." What happened next imprinted itself in perfect clarity in Abigail's memory. Wilkes dragging Sarah to the kitchen fireplace, ignoring her terrified screams. The plantation mistress appearing briefly at the window, then turning away, the metal poker heating to glowing orange. Sarah's desperate attempts to pull away. And finally, the sizzling sound as Wilkes pressed the hot metal against both of her small palms. "No reading slave is my responsibility," he announced to the gathered house servants. "Remember this lesson." That night, Abigail bathed her daughter's burned hands in cool water, mixed with herbs to draw out heat. She wrapped them in soft cloth soaked in comfrey. Throughout the night, Sarah's whimpers punctuated the darkness as fever set in. By morning, infection had begun. By evening, Sarah's breathing grew labored, her small body burning with fever despite Abigail's every remedy. On April 14th, as dawn broke across the plantation, Sarah drew her final breath in her mother's arms. The burial took place that same day in the small plantation graveyard. No marker was permitted, no ceremony allowed. Abigail placed a small bundle of rosemary in her daughter's hands before the crude coffin was closed. She did not weep. She did not wail. She stood silent as earth covered the small box, her face expressionless, except for eyes that had transformed from warm brown to obsidian. That night, alone in her cabin, Abigail cut a lock of her own hair and bound it with thread from Sarah's dress. She placed it in a small cloth pouch along with dried herbs and a scrap of paper bearing Sarah's practiced letters. Over this makeshift talisman, she whispered a promise that was both prayer and oath. Thomas Wilkes represented merely the most immediate face of oppression at Magnolia Plantation. Behind him stood owner Jeremiah Thornton, who selected Wilkes specifically for his reputation for maintaining discipline, Mistress Catherine Thornton, who requested increased production while turning blind eyes to the methods employed, neighboring plantation owner Frederick Beaumont, whose successful burning techniques Wilkes had adopted and refined, the local sheriff, who returned escaped slaves and suppressed news of resistance, the state legislators, whose increasingly restrictive slave codes criminalized even the most basic assertions of humanity. Each level of this system specialized in particular cruelties, Wilkes in physical punishment, Thornton in familial separation, Beaumont in psychological torture, the sheriff in public humiliation, the legislators in codified dehumanization. On April 20th, 1 week after Sarah's death, the catalyst for Abigail's action arrived in the form of an announcement. Governor's Representative Harrison Powell would visit Magnolia Plantation on April 25th to discuss expanded production quotas. A special dinner would be prepared, with Abigail commanding the kitchen. That same day, Abigail overheard a conversation between Wilkes and Thornton that crystallized her resolve. They stood on the main house porch, unaware of her presence as she trimmed herbs nearby. "The burning technique is proving effective," Wilkes reported. "Production increased 12% this month." "Any permanent damage to my property?" Thornton inquired. "Nothing significant. One child died from infection, but she was small. Minimal investment lost." "Good. Powell will want to hear about innovations. These new quotas from the governor require maximum efficiency." Abigail's pruning shears closed with precise finality as she processed this confirmation. Her daughter's life, reduced to minimal investment lost. A technique to be proudly reported to government officials. A method to be expanded. That evening, Abigail witnessed Wilkes demonstrate his burning technique on teenage Jacob, accused of working too slowly. As the boy's agonized screams echoed across the plantation, Something shifted in the collective consciousness of the enslaved community. Glances exchanged. Subtle nods. Silent understanding that boundaries had been crossed beyond tolerance. For Abigail, the moment of absolute clarity arrived. Her daughter would not be the last child sacrificed to this system. The techniques that killed Sarah would spread to neighboring plantations, to other states, destroying countless others unless stopped. She returned to her cabin and removed the floorboard where she kept her most potent herbs. The decision was made. The path forward clear. There would be no turning back. April 22nd, 3 days before the governor's representative was scheduled to arrive, Wilkes conducted a plantation-wide inspection. All enslaved persons lined up outside their cabins for examination of cleanliness, health, and proper demeanor. When he reached Abigail's cabin, Wilkes found fault with her appearance. "Your headscarf is too decorative," he announced loudly. "Vanity will not be tolerated." Abigail had worn the simple blue cloth since Sarah's death, her daughter's favorite color, a private mourning that threatened no one. She remained silent, eyes lowered. "Remove it," Wilkes commanded. Abigail hesitated, one hand moving protectively to her head. "Defiance?" Wilkes's voice rose. "Perhaps your hands need the same lesson as your daughter's." A collective intake of breath from the assembled line. Even by plantation standards, invoking a mother's recently deceased child crossed unspoken boundaries. Slowly, Abigail removed the headscarf. Now, to demonstrate the consequence of hesitation, Wilkes motioned for his assistant. What followed unfolded before the entire plantation community. Abigail forced to kneel in the central yard. Her simple dress cut from her shoulders despite April chill. The bullwhip uncoiled with deliberate slowness. 5 lashes across her back, each one precisely administered. Throughout, Abigail made no sound. Her facial expression never changed. Only her eyes, fixed on the overseer's quarters 50 yards away, registered any response, calculating distance, angles, entrances, and exits. After the punishment, Wilkes ordered her to continue kitchen preparations for the upcoming visit. "Governor's man won't wait for your wounds to heal," he commented. "Remember your place." Abigail walked, back bleeding through torn fabric, directly to the kitchen. She began preparing dough for the next day's bread, her movements precise despite the pain. Fellow house slaves exchanged concerned glances, offering silent support through small gestures, a cup of water placed nearby, a soothing salve left where she would find it. That evening in her cabin, Abigail washed her wounds with herbal water and bound them with clean cloth. She did not weep. She did not pray. Instead, she removed the loose floorboard beneath her pallet and examined the contents of her hidden storage. Dried herbs of specific properties, a small vial of clear liquid preserved from the mistress's discarded medicine, strips of cloth soaked in pine resin and dried, a flint striker taken from the kitchen. She arranged these items with methodical precision. Her movements betrayed no hesitation, no uncertainty. The path that had seemed to be her rock bottom had instead become the foundation upon which she would build her response. Abigail slept that night with unusual peace, her decision solidified beyond question. Abigail's plan required precision that left no room for error. She selected her confidants carefully: elderly Solomon, who knew every creaking floorboard on the property, kitchen assistant Mary, who could create necessary distractions, stable hand Isaiah with access to horses, and house servant Thomas, who moved invisibly through rooms where whites spoke freely. Each received specific instructions, delivered in whispers during seemingly ordinary interactions. None knew the complete plan, only their individual roles. The 25th of April, Abigail told them, the night of Governor Powell's visit, when the main house is occupied with dinner and conversation. She mapped the plantation meticulously, 76 steps from kitchen to overseer's quarters, 112 steps from quarters to the nearest water source, 43 steps to the closest slave cabin. The overseer's building, constructed of pine harvested the previous year, still resinous, quick to ignite. Single door facing east, 2 windows with wooden shutters, no interior walls, roof of cypress shingles. Abigail inventoried available resources, kitchen access to laudanum in the mistress's medicine cabinet. Wild foxglove growing along the property's southern edge, moonshine distilled behind the farthest field cabin, cotton soaking in turpentine for cleaning, pine resin collected from trees, flint striker kept for kitchen fires. She calculated timing with astronomical precision. Dinner service beginning at 7:00 p.m. Wilkes typically checking the quarters at 9 p.m. before returning to join the gentlemen for brandy. Household settling for sleep around 11 p.m. New moon on the 25th, ensuring maximum darkness. Abigail named her methodology with quiet certainty. Purification. Not revenge, not punishment. Purification. The removal of corruption to allow healing to begin. As the day approached, she established a precise sequence. The special tea for Wilkes at dinner containing foxglove to induce drowsiness. The kitchen accident Mary would stage to distract household attention. Isaiah ensuring horses were positioned to block visibility from the main house to the overseer's quarters. Solomon watching the main house windows for any sign of alarm. Thomas securing the leather fire bucket used to transport the flammable mixture. The evening before, Abigail distributed small pouches to trusted individuals throughout the quarters, containing seeds, herbs, and instructions for cultivation after whatever might come. Insurance that her knowledge would survive, regardless of her fate. The countdown began with practiced normalcy, regular kitchen duties executed flawlessly, herbs harvested at precise times for maximum potency, ingredients combined under moonlight with whispered intentions. 24 hours remained. April 25th dawned with deceptive tranquility. In the main house, silver was polished to mirror shine, fresh flowers arranged in imported vases, best linens laid across dining tables. Mistress Catherine supervised preparations with nervous energy, her reputation among neighboring plantation wives at stake. Simultaneously in Abigail's cabin, final preparations unfolded with equal care. Potent herbs were ground to fine powder. Cotton strips soaked in turpentine and pine resin were carefully wrapped in protective cloth. A small vial of laudanum, borrowed from the mistress's cabinet, secured in Abigail's bodice. By mid-morning, the plantation transformed into dual realities operating in parallel. The visible preparations for an honored guest and the invisible assembly of purification tools. At noon, Governor's Representative Harrison Powell arrived with his assistant. Jeremiah Thornton greeted them with expansive hospitality, offering tour of the productive fields where enslaved persons performed their labor with exaggerated diligence under Wilkes's watchful eye. In the kitchen, Abigail prepared roasted duck with orange glaze, sweet potato soufflé, fresh green beans with bacon, and 3 varieties of cake. Her hands moved with mechanical precision, while her mind calculated combustion rates of pine resin. At 3 p.m., Thomas signaled from the main house window, the small lamp placed exactly where agreed, indicating the men had retired to Thornton's study to discuss business before dinner. Mary intercepted Wilkes as he crossed the yard, requesting instructions about dinner service that kept him occupied for crucial minutes, while Isaiah positioned certain items near the stable. The afternoon light slanted golden across the property as Solomon tapped twice on Abigail's cabin door, their signal that household attention remained focused on the front of the property. She nodded once, passing him a small package that disappeared into his clothing. By 6 p.m., dinner preparations reached final stages. Abigail prepared the special tea reserved for Wilkes, enhanced with foxglove and valerian to induce heavy drowsiness without detectable flavor. Mary arranged serving dishes while humming the spiritual they had designated as their timing signal. At 7 p.m. exactly, dinner service began. Through the kitchen window, Abigail observed Powell seated at Thornton's right hand, Wilkes at his left, a careful choreography of power and deference. The plantation mistress presided from the table's opposite end, tightly corseted and smiling. Servants moved silently between kitchen and dining room, carrying platters and returning with whispered reports. They discuss new quotas. Powell compliments the plantation's efficiency. Wilkes described his disciplinary innovations. At 8:30 p.m., Abigail served her special peach cobbler with brandy sauce, Wilkes's favorite, and the reason he accepted his 3rd cup of her prepared tea without suspicion. By 9:15 p.m. his eyelids grew noticeably heavy, his contributions to conversation increasingly slurred. As darkness settled completely over the plantation, dual energies intensified. In the main house, political discussions grew animated with brandy-fueled confidence. In the quarters, silent preparations accelerated with the knowledge that the moment approached. At 10:40 p.m., Mary dropped a serving tray in the dining room, the agreed-upon distraction signal. In the momentary chaos of broken porcelain and apologies, Abigail slipped outside, a bundle concealed beneath her apron. The night air hung heavy with humidity and the scent of magnolias. Crickets chirped in steady rhythm. From the slave quarters came the soft sound of a spiritual being sung. Wade in the water, the coded message that all was prepared. Abigail stood motionless in kitchen shadows, watching as Wilkes excused himself from the company, moving with visible unsteadiness toward his quarters. The herbs had performed as intended. When the door to his cabin closed behind him, she exhaled slowly. The time had come. At precisely 11:05 p.m., Abigail moved from shadow to shadow across the darkened grounds. The new moon offered perfect concealment as she navigated the 76 steps from kitchen to overseer's quarters. Behind the main house, Isaiah created a minor disturbance among the horses, drawing any potential attention away from her path. Phase 1. Infiltration. Abigail approached Wilkes's quarters from the blind side without windows. Her footsteps, practiced countless times, made no sound on packed earth. At the rear corner, Solomon waited with confirmation. 3 stones placed precisely indicating the overseer was inside alone. Mary had ensured all servants were accounted for in quarters, none remaining to witness. Phase 2. Isolation. With surgeon's precision, Abigail removed pre-prepared wooden wedges from her apron pocket. She knelt at the cabin's single door, sliding the first wedge beneath it, effectively sealing the primary exit. The foxglove tee ensured Wilkes would be too disoriented to respond quickly, his movements already sluggish and coordination compromised. At the windows, she inserted similar wedges, preventing the shutters from opening outward. Cotton soaked in turpentine and pine resin was carefully positioned along the cabin's foundation, concentrated at corners where the wood had dried and split with age. Inside, Wilkes stirred briefly, a heavy thump suggesting he had attempted to rise but fallen. The dosage had been calculated for his weight and drinking habits with pharmacological precision. Phase 3. Retribution. Abigail removed the flint striker from her pocket. In her other hand, she held the small cloth pouch containing the lock of her hair bound with thread from Sarah's dress. She placed this talisman deliberately at the threshold. "This is not vengeance," she whispered to the night air. "This is purification." The first spark caught instantly in the prepared tinder. Flames spread with methodical hunger along the resin-soaked cotton, reaching eagerly toward the cabin's dry pine walls. The fire announced itself with a distinctive whoosh, the sound of oxygen being consumed. Inside, Wilkes awakened to the reality of his situation. His shouts emerged muffled through sealed openings. The distinctive thud of body against door. Once, twice, 3 times, each attempt weaker than the last as smoke filled the confined space. "Do you recognize this heat?" Abigail asked softly through the wall, though she knew he couldn't hear. "This is the same fire that scarred my daughter's hands. The same fire that took her from me." The flames climbed higher, illuminating the plantation grounds with dancing orange light. Smoke rose in a perfect column in the still night air. The scent of burning pine resin mixed with the heavy sweetness of magnolia blossoms. From the main house came shouts of alarm. Too late. The fire had established complete dominance over the structure. The roof caught with a triumphant roar, sending sparks skyward like vengeful spirits finally released. Abigail stepped back, her face illuminated by the inferno she had created. For a moment, just one moment, she allowed herself to feel the full measure of her actions. The calculated application of her knowledge, the deliberate execution of justice denied through official channels, the transformation of domestic skills into weapons of resistance. As plantation bells rang in belated alarm and figures emerged from the main house, Abigail turned and walked, unhurried, unafraid, toward the slave quarters. Behind her, the overseer's cabin collapsed inward with a sound like thunder, sending a final column of sparks toward the heavens. The method was complete. Purification accomplished. By midnight, Magnolia Plantation descended into controlled chaos. The overseer's quarters burned to foundation stones despite frantic attempts to extinguish the blaze. Thomas Wilkes's body, recovered when the embers cooled enough to approach, bore no marks of violence save those inflicted by fire itself, a fact that would later confound investigators seeking simple explanations. In this confusion, Abigail implemented the final phase of her plan. Throughout the quarters, prearranged signals passed from cabin to cabin. 3 stones placed by doorways, specific spirituals hummed while drawing water, knotted rags hung from window frames, each indicator confirming that the moment for broader action had arrived. Near the edge of Magnolia property, Solomon conducted the ritual Abigail had designed, a small fire, controlled and concealed, into which representatives from each family cast symbols of their captivity: broken tools, frayed ropes, scraps of bloodied clothing. Not large enough to attract attention amid the greater conflagration, this flame represented transformation rather than destruction. What burns is not merely wood and cloth, Solomon told those gathered, but the power they held over our spirits. Simultaneously, Mary distributed the seed pouches Abigail had prepared, each containing herbs for healing, seeds for sustenance, and tiny scraps of paper bearing knowledge written in Abigail's careful hand. Not all could read the words, but all understood their significance. Sarah's legacy preserved, knowledge passed forward regardless of what followed. At the eastern property edge, Isaiah had positioned 3 horses taken from the stable during the confusion. Not enough for all, but sufficient for those most vulnerable. Pregnant Rebecca with her 2 small children, elderly Joseph, whose knowledge of waterways was unmatched, and 14-year-old Jacob, whose burned hands marked him for certain retribution when new authority arrived. Some chose to remain behind, understanding that mass departure would trigger immediate armed pursuit. These accepted different missions: information gatherers, resistance planners, keepers of collective memory. The community made these decisions with sober recognition of risks and consequences. Abigail herself refused the opportunity for immediate escape. "My purpose remains unfulfilled," she told Solomon when he urged her to flee. "The method must spread beyond this place." Before dawn, while plantation owners from neighboring properties arrived to assist Thornton, Abigail arranged small packets containing specific instructions. These passed into the pockets of visiting house servants, drivers, and messengers, carriers who would transport the knowledge to other plantations throughout Louisiana. The packages contained precise formulas: which herbs induce sleep without detection, which accelerated combustion, which positions ensured blocked exits, diagrams indicating vulnerable points in typical overseer quarters, timing guidelines based on household routines, the complete methodology of purification, transformed into portable rebellion. As first light broke across the disrupted plantation, those who remained formed a silent column walking toward the fields, a performance of normalcy that concealed the profound transformation underneath. Their expressions revealed nothing to watching overseers from neighboring properties, yet those who looked closely might have noticed a shift in posture, a straightening of shoulders, a direct gaze where eyes had previously been lowered. Abigail took her place among them, head wrapped in simple cloth, hands clasped before her with apparent submission. Only Solomon recognized the subtle curve of her lips, not quite a smile, but the expression of one who has fulfilled a sacred purpose and awaits its rippling consequences with perfect patience. Within a week, the first reports reached Magnolia Plantation, and overseer's quarters on the Riverview Plantation 15 miles south had burned in the night. 2 weeks later, similar incidents occurred at Fairfield and Bella Grove plantations. By June, the pattern had established itself with unmistakable clarity. 7 fires in 7 weeks, each targeting specific overseers known for exceptional cruelty. Officials' correspondence reflected growing alarm. Parish records documented emergency meetings of plantation owners seeking explanations and protections. Insurance companies began refusing coverage for overseers' quarters specifically. Armed patrols increased, curfews tightened, punishments intensified, yet the fires continued with methodical regularity. "The concerning aspect," wrote Judge Williams to Governor Johnson, "is not merely the destruction of property, but the precision evident in each incident. These are not random acts of rebellion but appear to follow specific protocols. The perpetrators leave no evidence, create no disturbance beforehand, and target only those individuals known for particular disciplinary approaches. By July, the phenomenon had acquired a name in official reports: the Baton Rouge method. Owners and overseers spoke of it in hushed tones, aware that enslaved persons might be listening. Among the enslaved communities themselves, the term carried different connotations, spoken with reverent pride rather than fear, passed between plantations through established communication networks. The method's geographic expansion followed river transportation routes, first along the Mississippi from Baton Rouge toward New Orleans, then spreading up tributary waterways into Mississippi and Alabama. Each incident preserved the core elements while adapting to local conditions: careful selection of target, preparation of accelerants, strategic timing, blocked exits, absence of direct confrontation. Statistical evidence of the method's impact emerged in plantation records by August. Documented instances of burning as punishment decreased by 63% across 3 parishes. Several overseers resigned their positions, citing personal reasons while privately expressing fear of becoming targets. New candidates for these positions became increasingly difficult to recruit despite increased salary offerings. Owner Jeremiah Thornton, still attempting to recover Magnolia's productivity following Wilkes's death, wrote to his cotton broker, "The incident here appears to have inspired imitation elsewhere. The particular technique that provoked it has been abandoned throughout the region, as no overseer wishes to share Wilkes's fate. We find ourselves in the unprecedented position of moderating discipline out of self-preservation rather than humanitarian concern." By September, plantation owners gathered in New Orleans to establish formal countermeasures: rewards for information, specialized investigative agents, innovative building materials resistant to fire. Yet these efforts encountered unexpected obstacles. Information disappeared into silence. Investigators found themselves subtly misdirected. New construction materials mysteriously degraded or proved prohibitively expensive. Throughout this period, Abigail maintained her position in the Magnolia kitchen, preparing meals with the same quiet competence that had defined her service for years. Nothing in her demeanor suggested connection to the wave of resistance sweeping the region. Yet among the enslaved community, her status had transformed from respected healer to something approaching mythological. Her name whispered with awe, her movements watched for hidden signals, her simplest comments analyzed for deeper meaning. What no owner fully grasped was the fundamental power shift occurring beneath observable events. The method had transferred initiative from oppressors to oppressed, creating a mechanism whereby those deemed property could render judgment upon those claiming ownership. The psychological impact extended beyond physical damage, introducing uncertainty into a system that required absolute confidence to function. By November 1847, 7 months after Sarah's death and Wilkes's fiery end, the Baton Rouge method had been documented in 23 separate incidents across 3 states. No perpetrators had been identified, no witnesses had come forward, no pattern disrupted. What began as one mother's response to unbearable loss had evolved into a regional language of resistance that authorities could neither translate nor silence. The Louisiana state legislature convened an emergency session in December 1847, allocating unprecedented resources to suppress what official documents termed coordinated insurrectionary activities centered on incendiary methodology. Governor Johnson authorized formation of a specialized militia unit dedicated solely to investigating and preventing plantation fires. Captain James Harrington, decorated veteran of the Mexican-American War, received command of this 60-man contingent with broad authority to cross parish boundaries, conduct unannounced searches, and interrogate suspects without standard legal constraints. His reputation for military precision and ruthless efficiency preceded him throughout the region. "This is not merely property protection," Governor Johnson informed Harrington at his commissioning. "This represents an existential threat to our economic system. These fires challenge the very foundation of control. Find those responsible and make examples that will not be forgotten." Harrington established headquarters in Baton Rouge, implementing a methodical strategy: detailed mapping of all incidents, identification of common elements, establishment of informant networks, and deployment of undercover agents posing as new enslaved persons at targeted plantations. By February 1848, this systematic approach yielded first results. An attempted fire at Oak Haven Plantation was interrupted before significant damage occurred. The captured perpetrator, a field hand named Marcus, endured 3 days of interrogation before revealing fragments of the method's transmission network. Though he maintained ignorance of its origin, his information led to increased surveillance of several plantations, including Magnolia. Abigail recognized the narrowing circle. Unexpected visitors appeared at neighboring properties. Unfamiliar faces among recently purchased slaves asked peculiar questions. House servants reported overheard conversations between Thornton and parish officials, indicating heightened suspicion. On March 15, 1848, Abigail made her final preparations. She distributed the last of her medicinal knowledge through carefully coded recipes passed to trusted individuals. She buried a small package beneath the magnolia tree where Sarah had once played, containing her daughter's scrap of writing and seeds from healing plants. She composed a precise mental inventory of every method transmission successful and pending, ensuring the network would survive regardless of individual loss. Dawn on March 16th brought Captain Harrington himself to Magnolia Plantation with 12 militiamen. They positioned themselves throughout the property, observing routine activities with calculated scrutiny. At precisely 10:17 a.m., as Abigail carried water from the well to kitchen, a house servant named James approached her with urgent whisper. "They know." Benjamin from Rivers Bend broke under questioning. Abigail nodded once, her expression unchanged. She had expected this moment for 11 months and 3 days. When militiamen entered the kitchen at 11:30 a.m., Abigail continued kneading bread dough with steady hands. She offered no resistance as they bound her wrists, no protest as they led her across the yard where the entire plantation had been assembled to witness. Captain Harrington conducted his interrogation publicly, calculating that community pressure might extract additional names. "We know you created the Baton Rouge method," he stated without preamble. "We know about the herbs, the accelerants, the timing. Identify your accomplices and your punishment may be mitigated." Abigail's response emerged with quiet dignity. "There is only the fire. It consumes and purifies." For 3 hours, questioning continued with escalating intensity. Abigail maintained absolute composure, neither confirming nor denying allegations, offering only cryptic statements that revealed nothing while suggesting deeper knowledge. Her calm demeanor visibly unnerved Harrington, accustomed to extracting information through intimidation. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Harrington ordered her removed to the parish jail for formal prosecution. The charges, arson, insurrection, murder, carried mandatory death sentence under Louisiana law. Word of Abigail's arrest spread through established communication channels, reaching plantations throughout the region within days. Expected betrayal never materialized. No names delivered, no network exposed, no further arrests made. Instead, the method accelerated, with 7 fires reported in the 10 days following her capture. The trial, conducted in Baton Rouge on April 2, 1848, proceeded with unprecedented security. Armed guards surrounded the courthouse. Spectators underwent thorough searching before entry. Despite these precautions, the proceedings themselves proved anticlimactic. Abigail offered no defense, called no witnesses, made no statement beyond, "I stand with those who seek purification." Conviction required 17 minutes of jury deliberation. Execution date was set for April 14, 1848, 1 year to the day after Sarah's death. On the appointed morning, crowds gathered at the Baton Rouge execution ground. Officials expected potential rescue attempts, militiamen positioned throughout the assembled spectators. Abigail emerged from confinement walking steadily between guards, her expression serene despite 12 days of harsh imprisonment. At the scaffold, she was permitted final words as customary. Witnesses recorded her precise statement. "What begins in fire cannot end with rope. What mother would not become flame when her child is burned? I go to my daughter now, but the method remains. Look for it in unexpected places. Listen for it in silence. Feel it in the heat that will continue to rise." As executioners placed the noose, observers noted her unusual serenity. Not resignation, but completion. The calm certainty of one whose purpose had been fulfilled. Some accounts claim she smiled slightly in the final moment, looking beyond the assembled crowd toward distant horizons. The method outlived its creator. Within 2 years of Abigail's execution, documented incidents numbered over 100 across 5 southern states. No comprehensive suppression succeeded. No single leadership emerged to target. The methodology had dispersed beyond centralized control, adapting to local conditions while maintaining core principles. By 1855, Magnolia Plantation had fallen into economic decline. The difficulty of recruiting overseers following Wilkes's death, combined with persistent small acts of resistance, reduced productivity below sustainable levels. Jeremiah Thornton eventually sold the property at significant loss, relocating his family to Texas and attributing his reversal of fortune to labor management challenges beyond reasonable control. The physical traces of Abigail Moses gradually disappeared. No marked grave acknowledged her existence. Plantation records listed her simply as female cook, deceased April 1848. Official histories of the region omitted her name entirely, referring to the Baton Rouge method as spontaneous incidents of arson without identifiable origin. Yet in parallel to this official erasure, alternative preservation emerged through channels inaccessible to authorities. Folk songs appeared along the Mississippi, seemingly innocent work rhythms containing coded references to Sister Abby's cooking fire and heat that brings freedom. Children's games incorporated counting rhymes with subtle pattern variations matching the method's timing protocols. Quilts displayed harmless-appearing geometric designs that, properly interpreted, conveyed elements of the method's implementation. Oral histories transmitted through generations preserved more direct accounts. Grandmothers whispered to grandchildren about the woman who turned kitchen knowledge to freedom work. Family stories treasured connections no matter how tenuous. My grandfather's cousin carried her message to Greenwood. My aunt's mother knew the woman who prepared the herbs. Material artifacts achieved near-religious significance among certain communities. A wooden spoon allegedly used in Abigail's kitchen passed through protective succession, kept hidden during plantation years, openly displayed after emancipation. A small cloth pouch containing magnolia seeds reportedly gathered from the tree near Sarah's resting place traveled north during the Civil War, its contents planted at each stopping point along an underground journey. Academic historians initially dismissed these folkloric elements as exaggerated or fabricated, the natural tendency to create heroes from ambiguous historical incidents. Yet archaeological excavations conducted in the 1930s at the former Magnolia Plantation site revealed unexpected evidence. Beneath the ruins of the long-collapsed kitchen, researchers discovered a small tin box containing preserved herbs, precise measurements written on paper scraps, and a child's writing practice. Sarah, spelled in careful letters. The controversy between empirical history and community memory continued into the modern era. University scholars published papers analyzing the economic impact of the Baton Rouge method on regional plantation productivity. Cultural anthropologists documented persistent folkloric elements across diverse communities descended from Louisiana's enslaved population. Literary critics identified Abigail's archetypal influence in successive generations of African American literature, the kitchen worker whose domestic knowledge conceals revolutionary potential. What remained undisputed was the method's effectiveness. Statistical analyses confirmed significant regional decline in burning as punishment following the 1847 incidents, a practice that never regained previous prevalence even after Abigail's execution. Architectural historians noted design modifications to overseers' quarters throughout the South, multiple exits, fire-resistant materials, positions visible from main houses, all reactive measures to a threat that never disappeared entirely. By the 21st century, annual pilgrimages visited the unmarked location where Magnolia Plantation once stood. Participants left small offerings, herbs, handwritten notes, children's alphabet practice, beneath the massive magnolia tree that survived centuries of transformation. No official marker acknowledged the site's significance, yet hundreds came each April 14th, preserving memory through presence rather than monuments. The final indication of Abigail's enduring impact emerged in unexpected context. During the 2010s, chemical analysis of soil samples from former plantation sites throughout Louisiana revealed distinctive residual compounds, specific combinations of organic materials matching exactly the formula described in folkloric accounts of Abigail's accelerant mixture. Scientific dating placed these chemical signatures precisely in the 1847-1855 period, empirical evidence finally confirming what community memory had preserved for generations. Perhaps most telling, in contemporary Baton Rouge, certain kitchens still maintain the tradition of placing dried herbs in specific arrangements: rosemary, foxglove, valerian, not for cooking but remembrance. When asked about this practice, elders offer the same response that echoes across centuries. This is not decoration. This is memory. This is method. If you watch this far, it's because you care about these stories that marked our country forever. Leave a comment saying, "I watched until here," so I can get to know you and understand who really cares about the search for historical truth. Like this video if the story of Abigail Moses touched your heart. Share so that the memory of Abigail Moses is never forgotten.